And action. Away we go. This is part 2 of waxing the Shelby on Memorial Day, Monday, 2023. I will look back upon this day quite fondly. I hope, because the day is not over, anything could happen. You could have a stray UPS truck leave the road and go right into the side. I've seen things like that happen on YouTube, which are pretty hair-raising, but they do happen. So don't count the chickens before they're hatched, as the saying goes. Put a different shirt on. That STP shirt made me look like a blob. I'm not that fat, but it says that if you're on video, you're on TV or whatever, you look like you've put on 10 or 20 pounds. Why that is, I have no clue, no understanding why that happens. But that was not flattering, so different shirt hopefully puts me in a better light. Time to wax the sides. So I got the top of the fender. Now we're waxing the sides, in the shade of course. I had to change the position of the Shelby to avoid the sun. Get the sun off of the paint. It's always a lot better going when you wax the car in the shade. I suppose the logic behind that is the heat of the sun will keep the wax in a melted state, and it will just simply not come off the car adequately. It will not come off the paint. And the paint is cool to the touch. The wax goes on, it comes off better. That's my theory. Makes sense. Doesn't mean I'm right, but could be other reasons. I think that's the most likely one. And I'm not interested in experimenting to find out. Like I did with the spark plugs. I changed the spark plugs on this car the other day, and I foolishly set the gap at 0.054. Absolutely the wrong gap for this car, for this engine. That's for an HEI setup, which means high energy ignition, and that's for modern cars. Even though this car has a modern engine in it, it still has all the old jazz on it. All the old Shelby stuff. Original valve covers. Yet another plane. Make my video interesting. The car has a Petronics distributor on it and a flamethrower coil, but apparently that's not high ignition, high energy ignition enough to merit the insanely wide gap that I put on the plugs initially. So I pulled them all and I put a 0.035 gap on them. That's what's on it now. And we're coming along here nicely. Nicely. As I mentioned in part 1 of the video, I will get to the bumpers and wax the bumpers as well. It doesn't cause any damage, no harm, and no foul. And I probably should use a toothbrush for the GT350H to get the wax out of the crevices. Got an old one somewhere in the house that I can use, or in the garage. This wax is coming on quite nicely. Get underneath there. Hopefully I don't have a gut now. I lost weight actually. I lost some weight and 1 notch tighter on my belt. But I look like I gained weight in that last video. Crazy. Can always afford to lose, not to gain. Better to lose, never to gain. The luster of the paint is really being reflected in this wax. 100% Carnauba, that's the way to go. It's a little more pricey, but it's worth it. Definitely worth it. Yes, the red and gold combinations are pretty rare combination for Hertz cars. For those that don't know too much about Hertz and the rental program in the 1960s, actually 1966 was the start of the Shelby Mustang. It's kind of an experimental color. They made 61 red and golds. I think of that, there are about 39 that are accounted for and 22 that are missing. Current whereabouts unknown. That doesn't mean they won't resurface. Some of them were wrecked, I suspect. Not every car survived the 60s, let me assure you. These cars were abused in the day. Now they're worshipped by those that like them. Not everybody likes a Mustang. There's Camaro lovers and Challenger lovers. I like them all. I like all the cars. Back in the day, I was very partial to Ford brand Mustangs. I still am, but as you get older, or as one ages, one develops an appreciation for the other brands as well, because let's face it, they were all hot cars from the muscle car era that were muscle cars. I'm not talking about four-door sedans, I'm talking about those that fit the muscle car moniker. Let's get to the door here. I'm not exactly happy about or content being over cement, because that can be fraught with peril if you drop this on the cement. Did that once before, and it picks up all the filth, rubble, stones, anything that'll scratch your paint as you run it across. So you better not drop it. Better not drop it this time, that's for sure. And the bullet mirror. Quite nicely. A little story about this mirror here. It's not original to the car, and it's not an original bullet mirror. Wait for that plane. Happy travels. The bullet mirrors, the originals are easily detected, or well, not so easily, depending on how good your eyesight is. By looking at the actual mirror itself, there is a stenciling in the mirror that says HCX, or there's a little stenciling anyway. It's like, it's got an X in it, HX, HCX, something like that. And it's actually stenciled on the periphery of the mirror, and that's how you know you have an original. Well, I have an original, so I'm using the crappy one on here and let that get pitted and all nasty and saving the original in a box. I suppose I should put the original on it, but I derive a certain amount of satisfaction knowing I have an original sitting in a box. It's my backup plan. I suppose if I was going to enter the car and do a show, this car is not going to win any concourse, let me assure you. It's a day 2 car. It's been a day 2 car since the late 60s, early 70s, and that's how I kept it. And that's actually how I like it. I'm sure the subsequent owner we'll probably change things around. I don't think the subsequent owner will be my son. He'll probably get rid of it before I'm cold in the grave. It's typically how families work, right? They get rid of the cars of their parents. They can't wait to get rid of them, cash out. What they do with the cash, who knows? They're not getting anything like this with the cash. They're going to get something probably a little less collectible, something that will depreciate a little less value. But to each their own, as the saying goes. Door here. I'll get you, Mr. Brake Scoop, in a bit. And these brake scoops are somewhat functional, although in reality, if you look at where the hole goes toward the rear brake to cool the rear drums, it's not exactly going toward the drums. It's just blowing air more or less on the tire. And I remember the proprietor of Legendary Motor Car, Peter Kloot, told me that they really were more like parachutes and they slowed the car down on the track. So on his Hertz, he got rid of them. His Hertz race car that he had, he was racing that car back in the 90s, I believe. So that's that. Get around the key slot here. Apparently thieves have a new way of stealing cars. The old keys, we may go back to the old key again, the old key system. Because the way the electronics are today, they apparently can hack into, especially on Hellcats, Challengers, they're a big target, Challengers, Chargers. You go in through the front headlight and they're able to reprogram it and start your car right up. There's a guy on YouTube, Racer X, and he goes through the whole methodology that thieves use to get at those cars. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the rocker panel. I'll get to that later. Just want to get the door, the upper levels. As I mentioned before, top down, right? I'm doing the waxing. Looks like I got full coverage here. And wax on, wax off, as the Karate Kid would say. Actually, his teacher would say. See, this is starting to get into the sunlight, and now I can see how it's a little more difficult to remove the wax because it's sticky. More paste, not drying off. That's why you want to do it out in the sun as much as you can. And also, when you're under a tree, and I'm not quite under a tree, beware of falling branches. There's a tree next to me that's kind of in a state of decay, and I find the odd branch in my driveway when I'm pulling in. Not with this car, but with the daily driver. So, freak accidents happen. All of a sudden, spontaneously, a tree branch, and it could be a big one, will drop right on your car. So you've got to be, once again, situationally aware of what could happen and try to foreclose that from happening. There's a certain amount you can't control, but there's a certain amount you can. Situational awareness can keep you out of trouble. Hypervigilance. Maybe I'm a bit hypervigilant, I don't know. Could be a character trait, maybe it's a learned trait, I don't know. But it can save your life. It can also save your car and heartache down the road. Watch as I say this, a big branch from my pine tree will go boom right on the roof and cave it in. That's how my life works. That's how it works. So anyway, getting back to the thievery in electronics, an old style key may be a better way. Not too old though, I mean, they can just hotwire your car, but older, like 2012, 2013, I think Ford had what's called a passive theft system. Made it much harder to steal a car, but you still had to put an ignition key in the ignition. These days with that starter key and a push button, if you're a Challenger owner or a Charger owner, you are at risk. Apparently they can catch a signal in the parking lot and then they can lock in on that signal and program it into whatever it is they're using to steal your car. It's starting to get hot in the sun. I don't know what we're going up to today, but it certainly feels like summer now. Well, we're not officially in summer. Got a little bit of the brake score. Still brake score. Got some detritus in there. Stray wax, I'll get that out. Something very fine and thin. Yes, this is going on nicely now. What's down here? There's wax. Lots of fun waxing in the